And hello, everyone. Dwayne here. Welcome to another exciting problem video here on the Radical of Math. In front of us, we have question 1 of the Advanced Placement Precalculus free response questions for 2025. In the video link below, I have put the PDF, so that way you can follow along. This is a more condensed format. With that said, let me read to you the general problem. We're going to solve the problem, and then I'm going to discuss the merit of the problem. The function f is decreasing and defined for all real numbers. That's this syntax right here. You see this table provided, and then you're given a function g that is defined by this equation right here. And then they ask 6 questions. Question 1 talks about composition of function in inverse. Question B talks about the zeros of the function and its end behavior. And then question C talks about the type of function in justification. And so already I have a critique. And that is, if you notice the point values that I would assign on a 9-point scale, question C is the most straightforward question, but yet it's last. While the hardest question is placed first. So for those that are unaware, in this part of the free response, students are allowed calculators and have only 30 minutes to do a bunch of different steps in the problem. So already I see not only a grading issue, but also an attempt to muddle the waters instead of being clear-cut, asking the students what they know and what they don't know. So, with that being said, I'm going to answer this in what I think is the best order, which is from C back to B. Let me grab my eraser. We're going to get started. So question C says, based on the table, what type of function is f? And it gives you an option: linear, quadratic, exponential, and logarithmic. And then part 2 of that is provide reasoning for your choice. So this is an Algebra 2 question. You will find a lot of this problem is an Algebra 2 question, which is another critique I have just in general for advanced placement precalculus, is there's much more emphasis on the algebra bits than on the other bits that students need to have for college level mathematics. So this is the table, and what you find out is when you start plotting points is that the curve comes in like that. It's a rough picture, but you get the idea. And so if you are alert to this, you realize that there is a similar curve that exists like that, and it's y equals 1 over x. And so the question is not asking you to derive this equation, which you can do, but to recognize the pattern, and the pattern is this. So we know y equals x to negative 1. So instantly we know it is exponential. And the reason for that is, note that for each value of x, so as x increases by 1, y decreases by half of the previous number. So divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, or multiply half, 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 half. So there's 2 points. But if you're proficient in Algebra 2, you shouldn't be asked that question again. That's something that you should already know. All right, so let's go into question B. Question B is find the zeros of g of x or indicate that there are no such values. And in part 2, which is what we're going to tackle first, is determine the end behavior of g as x increases without bound. And third critique, express this as a limit. Limits are introduced very early in advanced placement precalculus, and I think that is an error. The student doesn't really need to understand limit until they understand fully enough about the nature of function to where the concept of limit, where you start, here's a curve, and you have 2 points, and you have a secant line, and all that. When you start heading to the route of derivative, that is when limit is a little bit more approachable. Instead, what's happening is that limit is kind of being bastardized for the sake of convenience and expediency. And therefore, it doesn't belong in this context. Instead, it needs to be presented at a different point of the curriculum. That way, the student can fully appreciate the nature of limit and why we have it. So in behavior, all we have to do here is as x grows sufficiently large, what happens is this term will be greater than that. And because there's a minus sign, the general curve is going to be this. And therefore, because we're asked to do a limit, we're going to do a limit. That's the limit. So that's an easy point. Now, the zeros of the function, this is where you are pretty much forced to use a calculator. And I don't agree with that either. Now, the 3 zeros are these, but you have to use a calculator that is able to derive this, and you better hope you have that. You better hope you can plug that equation into an approved calculator, most likely a graphing calculator, most likely a TI-84, and provide those 3 values. But those are the zeros. So basically set this 0 factor into 3 decimal places. That's what it says on the instruction sheet. So this, I can see why it's in a pre-calculus course. Even though, yeah, you're using a calculator, this one I actually understand because this is a little bit more complicated function than what you've seen in Algebra 2. However, question A is pure Algebra 2. And I really wonder why we're having it. And what it tells me is students are not grasping function well enough. So question A is you have a composition. So you are told that H is defined as G of f of x at x equals 1. And what you were told is to find h of 1. And all the student has to do here is to go, okay, f of x of 1 equals 1.75. Because we can look at the chart. And we plug it into the equation, another calculator question, and you'll find it is 0.333. So once again, we're using calculator. Luckily, this is a little bit less calculator sensitive. The idea is understanding how composition of function occurs. The other question is find f inverse of 3.5, or indicates not to find. Is do you understand inverse? So inverse simply means x becomes y, y becomes x. Y is f of x. So we're just going to do that. And now this problem becomes very straightforward. So f of x 3.5 becomes 0. And so f of x, f inverse of 3.5 becomes 0. So all in all, my analysis of question 1 is as follows. So the first thing I would say is this is 90% an Algebra 2 question. You should be able to do the vast majority of this question in Algebra 2. The only one is in behavior, but you can write that out in words instead of writing limit. So that's the first big thing, is I would say, yeah, this is really an Algebra 2 question masquerading as a pre-calculus question. The next thing is you need the calculator twice. Now, I don't know these days on the advanced placement exam if there is an electronic calculator embedded or you got to bring your own. I'm going to assume you got to bring your own. But nevertheless, you need the calculator twice, and one needs to be able to handle cubics. One of those need cubic roots. And so you need to know how to do that on your calculator, because the cubic formula is often not taught in the United States, and therefore that could be a loss of a couple points looking at the grading part of it. The other thing I noticed about this is the presentation of the question is in the wrong order. If I am grading this, I want to see if the student can recognize, hey, do you know what type of function this is? Because that shows a deeper understanding than just doing the straight calculation. And so I would have done this in CBA order instead of how the question was presented. So all in all, using the 9-point scale, the strength and quality of question, I can rate this no higher than, I would say, a 4 or a 5. 9 being best question. This is not that hard a question. It leverages a lot of previous learning, and it shows one of the main deficiencies in advanced placement precalculus, and that is there is an implicit assumption that students are not getting sufficient repetition and understanding in lower level mathematics courses, and this is starting to become almost a remedial / algebra 3 because students need more time and exposure to handle something that should be very straightforward. And so I'll leave you with that. So in future videos, we're going to be looking at questions 2, 3, and 4 with the same type of analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, follow, subscribe, and as always, take care of yourself, take care of one another. God bless.